Great, thanks, Andrew. So we have about 45 minutes to cover a pretty broad and complex topic. So to keep things manageable on our side and to make it useful for you guys, we tried to focus on what we think are three representative markets: the U.S., Canada, and Germany. So for the next 45 minutes, we've broken this up into 5 broad topics. First, a really quick background in terms of global trends. I'll cover the U.S., and then I'm going to transition over to my colleague MJ, who will cover Canada and Germany, and then wrap up with just a general summary and hopefully a good interactive Q&A session. So again, just for a reminder, we're really focusing on just 3 markets: the U.S., Canada, and Germany. We're more than happy to discuss other parts of the world during the Q&A or some additional follow-up after the webinar today. I really wanted to focus on those 3 to give you a sense of some of the similarities and differences in terms of helping it for planning for either launching or additional indications for specialty and biotech products. So as we get started, we wanted to first put you to work with a polling question that I'm going to hand back to Andrew for the polling question. We have a few of these during the webinar today just to make it a little bit more interactive and get some information from you in terms of understandings and particular interests. So Andrew, I'll open it to you or hand it to you for the polling.
Great, thank you very much. We certainly do have a polling question, one of 3 here for the webinar today. And you can vote on this in real time by clicking on your screen. So the question that we have for you: what is your current role in your organization? Your options: global health economics and outcomes research, global market access, U.S. health outcomes, or U.S. managed markets and payers, or other positions that aren't listed above. All right, well, it looks like most of you have voted at this point. I'm going to close polling now and share the results with you. Looks like the majority of you, 37%, said other positions not listed above, actually. 33% said U.S. managed markets and payers, while 13% said global market access, 10% global health economics and outcomes research, and just 7% of you said U.S. health outcomes. And with that, I will hand the mic back to you.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So I'm going to go quickly through just some general trends. This is more contextual for some of the later discussion around the specific markets. So just, I think this slide, probably a number of you are familiar with, but I think it's always interesting to look back in terms of where healthcare expenditures have gone globally, and then for our 3 markets that we're interested in today. So if you look back over the last 35 years or so, healthcare expenditures as a percentage of GDP have continued to rise, most notably within the U.S., where we're now almost double the OECD average in terms of percent of GDP expenditures. And it can be debated in terms of what's the optimal level for expenditure, but I think the increasing trend over time is something that has been noted by a number of markets and has been a cause of concern, especially in recent years. And if you think about it in terms of some of the responses, a number of markets, either at a national, regional, or local level, have been looking at potential avenues or venues for managing pricing, reimbursement, and access. And you do see this increase in the last 15 years or so in terms of the number of agencies that exist that are focused on health technology assessment. And if you look in the last 5 years, say 5 to 10 years, even some of the existing agencies out there have begun to redefine their remit and focus. So we see since the early 2000s to present a number of new agencies as well as a revamping of existing agencies. Within the last couple of years, the other interesting piece, at least from a health economist, has really been this introduction or reintroduction of the concept of value when discussing health technology or interventions from a health standpoint. So most notably the UK with the introduction of at least the phrase so far, value-based pricing, but this idea of value for money, looking at value-based assessments, understanding the value with respect to potential cost of innovative therapies is now become much more prevalent in discussions in most developed nations, especially where health technology assessment agencies are in existence. So I'm going to move over to the U.S. in terms of some of the current and future access challenges for specialty and biopharmaceutics. I think, again, most people are familiar with the fact that there's been pretty dramatic changes over the last decade or two, and this will continue and will definitely escalate in the next 5 to 10 years. One thing to note is, even though specialty pharmaceuticals still represent a relatively small percentage of the total number of treatment options out there, they now account for more than 25% of total prescription expenditures in the U.S., and that's the actual amount of expenditures is expected to quadruple by 2020. And again, even though patients only represent just less than 5%, but 4.5% of the total potential population in the U.S., they actually account for 25% of total healthcare expenditures. So that's not just expenditures on the specialty product, but it also includes medical costs, the ER visits, hospitalization. So it's, even though it's still a relatively small number of patients and a small number of products, it's definitely become more on the radar for payers within the U.S. just because of the fact that they consume a significant portion of total expenditures. In fact, if you look at some recent polls that we've conducted with U.S. payers, there's a high level of attention now placed on what payers perceive as high-priced new products. 95% of payers rank that as a high or extremely high priority. In addition, 60% ranked as a high priority the ability to compare or analyze pharmacy or medical benefit use of oncology drugs, an area that typically has not been an area of focus or an area where there's a high degree of management. Now even oncology within the specialty market is now something that's definitely on the radar screen. We're also seeing what I kind of termed as public shaming, either by providers or payers for companies that have come out with what are perceived to be high prices. To fairly well-known examples, Sanofi was forced to lower the price of Zaltrap due to some negative publicity that came out from some providers around the relatively high costs compared to Avastin with what was, from their perspective, perceived to be minimal incremental benefit. And then most recently, in the last couple of months, Gilead has been hit with some negative press, both from providers and payers, around the high cost of its HCV treatment. So we're seeing a lot more in the U.S. In terms of negative publicity and more focus on that. Something to consider as well from a patient stakeholder standpoint, given the use of co-payments or co-insurance in the U.S. by a number of payers, these rising costs of medications are now seen as being a potential issue, because for patients with higher co-payments are significantly more likely to discontinue their therapy, and 42% are more likely to skip doses. So there's a potential issue in terms of effectiveness as a direct result of high costs.